Man, all right, good job on all those names. I gave you a tough chapter to read right there, but I'm not going to be reading those names tonight. We're not going to go to that part of the chapter. But look at 2 Samuel 23 and verse 8. It says, "These be the names of the mighty men whom David had." And you just read a lot of those names. Some of them are really hard to read. But those were a list of David's mighty men. And we're going to go through and we're going to look at stories of some of the individuals that were highlighted, specifically 3. And what I want to talk about tonight, the title of my message is "The Men Behind a Man." And often when there is a church, any church, and especially in a church plant, a lot of times all eyes and all focus is kind of on the pastor. But let me tell you something. The pastor is not the only thing in a church. All right, the church, it is a congregation of believers, and I'm afraid too many times when it comes to church, it often turns into like this spectator sport. And I know when I started my church, you know, when we went to Rock Falls, we didn't know anybody in the town. We didn't have any families, going with us to start this church. We had people from my dad's church that helped us knock doors and get the word out. They came the first several weeks to kind of help with the service and stuff. But, we didn't know anybody. It was all new area, didn't know anybody. And I remember after the first 4 weeks when people from my dad's church came out and were helping, then it was just us and the local people. And the Lord really blessed. We started out after the people from my dad's church started coming. We started out with about 25 people. We consistently had about 25 people. We've never really been any lower than that on a Sunday morning, so we were very blessed to be able to start at that way. However, I often felt like I was kind of just doing this one-man show every week. You know, I'd get up, I'd lead the singing, I'd do the announcements, I'd do the preaching. I kind of felt like I was doing everything. And if I wasn't doing it, my wife was doing it, and because she was playing the piano, or she was like just kind of behind the scenes doing stuff, taking care of things I wasn't able to do. And it just seemed like for a long time we had people that just came and they enjoyed the preaching, they were enjoying the one-man show. But I was kind of getting tired of the one-man show. I'm like, hey, it's about time for some people to start stepping up and doing some things. I can't be doing everything. My wife can't be doing everything. It's about time that that y'all as a church start getting involved and help making this thing work. And thank God, it eventually started happening. People started getting involved. They started seeing needs. They started doing stuff. And when all of a sudden, when other people got involved, it really made a difference, and things started going a little better. Things started seeming a little more like real church, and I didn't feel like it was a one-man show all the time. And I can't even tell you what an encouragement that was. But even now, today, while our church has grown and while there's a lot that goes on in our church and the Lord's really blessing, often when people talk about a church, they talk about the pastor. That he's always kind of the focal point or whatever. But let me tell you something, and I hate when people try to be humble. I hate it, and I'm not trying to be humble right now, but I'm going to tell you right now that, Liberty Baptist Church is not what it is just because of me. The Lord has blessed us with some very good, faithful people that are huge blessings. And so if you look at Liberty Baptist Church, I'll be the first one to admit and say that, hey, it's not just because of me. While often I'm the one that people look at and focus on, understand that there are some people that are behind me. There are people that are working with me. And one thing about David, all right? David was a great man. There's no doubt about it. David was a great man all by himself. David, when he was just a shepherd, we see that he was somebody who pleased God. God used him while he was just a shepherd to defeat Goliath all by himself. Okay, I don't want to take away anything from David. David was a great man, but as we see David start growing in greatness and doing greater things for God, it is very apparent that a lot of his greatness was not just because of David. David had some people behind him. David had some people that were working with him. You remember when those ladies sang that song, Saul hath slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands? I mean, do we really think David was the one who personally killed, 10,000s of people? No, not necessarily. I'm sure he killed quite a few. But you know what? He was the guy that was leading those battles, and he had people that were with him. He had these mighty men that were with him, that were doing the fighting, and yet David was kind of the one that was getting the credit for it. And so often when in church, once again, people kind of focus on the pastor, but it's not just the pastor. And I've been in ministry my whole life. My dad was a pastor my whole life. I've been a pastor for 7 years now. I have been around pastors. I've got pastor friends. And I know churches. I know pastors. I'm going to tell you right now, some of the greatest churches I've ever seen, it was not so much because the man himself was so great or the pastor was so great. You get to looking at that church and seeing how things work in that church, you'll see that church had some great people that were behind that pastor doing great things themselves that ultimately made the pastor look good. In fact, I've known some pastors before that I've heard them preach and I'm like, just to be honest, they're not very good. They're not that good at preachers. They don't really have that much charisma. They haven't got a lot of personality, but they've got these just spectacular churches. I mean, I'm thinking, how does this guy have a church that big? He can't preach his way out of a wet paper bag. And then you go to that church and you start meeting the people in that church and you start finding out he's got some great people in that church. He's got some people that love the Lord. He's got people that are behind him, that are working with him, and you find out why that church is great. And I'm here today to tell you it's not just about the pastor. And I want us to look at some of these things with some of the David's mighty men that were highlighted, that were specifically noted. And I want to just I want us to make some personal application. I want you to make personal application in your life, because if this church is going to succeed, if Sound Doctrine Baptist Church is going to become a thing that goes on and does great things for God, it's not going to be just because of what Brother Jim Weeb does. It's going to be because of what the rest of you do with him. That's what's going to really make the difference. And so let's look at a few examples. So this first one we see is, it says the Tachmonite that sat in the seat chief among the captains, the same was Adino the Eznite. He lift up his spear against 800, whom he slew at one time. Now let me tell you something. This guy obviously knew how to use a spear. All right? I wish I could see how he did that. How do you kill 800 people with a spear at one time? He obviously knew what he was doing. This man was very skilled at what he did. This man was a great warrior. Me personally, I am not a super intimidating figure, all right? People don't see me and, hide. And, big guys that are out there, they don't, which is kind of nice too, they don't pick fights with me because it proves nothing to fight me, that's what I'm saying? And so, I'm not this great threat. But if Adino the Eznite was behind me, nobody's going to mess with me, all right? Nobody's going to mess with me. And so think about David. All right, David's the guy getting the credit. David's the guy who ends up becoming the king. David is the leader. And understand, people talk about David kills his thousands. Yeah, but Adino killed 800 of those. David's killed his tens of thousands. But understand, he had men like Adino the Eznite that are working with him, who's not really getting any of the credit, who's not being mentioned. He's there kind of behind the scenes, but using his skills that he has to help David out. That's what he's doing. And understand that having a guy like Adino the Eznite, by your side, it's going to make you look pretty good, isn't it? And understand that while people would talk about David, it wasn't just David they were talking about. He had guys like Adino the Eznite. You know what? We need Adino the Eznites in our churches today. We need people who are skilled at what they do, who take their abilities and they use them for the work of the Lord. Most pastors, and I can include myself in this. Once again, I'm not trying to be humble. I hate people who try to be humble. But I am not, when I look at my skills and my abilities, I'm kind of a competitive guy by nature. But yet, when it comes to my abilities that I have, I'm usually not the best in the room at anything, I can kind of do a little bit of everything with some stuff, I can sing a little bit, but I'm not the best singer in the room usually. I can play the guitar a little bit, but there's always somebody that's better than me at music. I can do. There's always people that are better than me at pretty much everything. A lot of my pastor friends, they often, I'll hear them preach a message on the exact same subject that I preached a message on. I'll hear it, and I was like, man, theirs was so much better than mine. But you know what? I do what I can in that area. Most pastors usually aren't the best at what they do. And often what can happen, you can have somebody in the church who maybe in one area, they are better than the pastor at that. I'll bet, while David was a good warrior, and we know David could handle a sling and a stone, I'll bet Adino the Eznite was better with a spear than David. In fact, even though David, when David killed Goliath, we understand that that was God doing a battle through David right there. But I think, this is my personal opinion, I think you remove the power of God, and if you were to put David up against Adino the Eznite, I think Adino the Eznite would have won. That's just that's my personal opinion. Without the power of God, I think Adino the Eznite would have won. But you know what? Adino the Eznite, we don't see him getting lifted up with pride and thinking, you know what? David, he's the guy in charge of this army. David's the guy that's the boss, but you know what? I can throw a spear 30 yards farther than he can. I killed 800 people in the last battle. He only killed 80. He didn't talk about that. That wasn't what he was about. He's just doing what he can do. He understands David's the leader. I'm a soldier. And you know what? I'm going to do my best to help him get the victory. That is my job. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And you know what? It makes a pastor look good when he has people in his church that can do impressive things. It ends up making him look good when they have good singers, when they have a friendly church. You know how often I get complimented about how friendly our church is? And I think I'm a friendly person myself, but the thing is, when most people talk about how friendly our church is, they're not talking about me, they're talking about everybody else. But guess who hears about it? It's me that hears about it. It ends up making me look good, even though I'm not the guy always doing it. There's people in our church that, they'll remember stuff, they'll send people cards, they'll do things maybe that I even forgot to do, and I'm always the one it kind of comes back on. I end up looking good because of something that other people did in the church. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, it says, "And I, brethren, could not speak unto you as unto spiritual, but as unto carnal, even as unto babes in Christ. I have fed you with milk and not with meat. For hitherto you were not able to bear it, neither now are ye able." So why are these people babies? Why are they carnals? Why is it? "For ye are yet carnal, for whereas there is among you envying and strife and divisions, are ye not carnal, yet and walk as men? For while one saith, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are ye not carnal? Who then is Paul, and who is Apollos, but ministers, by whom ye believed, even as the Lord gave to every man? I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that planteth anything, neither he that watereth, but God that giveth the increase. Now he that planteth and he that watereth are one, and every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor." Listen, when it comes to a church, you can't let it be, the pastor's this, and no, we are all one church. We're one body of believers. We're all working for the same thing. And ultimately, it's not the pastor that's getting the increase. It's not you that's getting in the increase. It's God that's getting the increase. And you know what our job is? If you need to, if you're worried about you personally, you know what you've got to do? You've got to say, where has God placed me in the body? And wherever God has placed you in the body, you need to make sure that that works and that it works great. And don't get caught up with envying, saying, I think I could handle this spot better. I could do that better. I could outdo Brother Jim in this, and I think I could have preached that message a little better. I think I've got a better explanation of this passage. That's not your job. You know what your job is to do, especially while the preaching's going on? Your job is to sit there and listen and to encourage and support and to back up. That's what you're not to critique who's better and who could have explained it better and things like that. Not to pick it apart. Bible says in verse 9, it says, "For we are laborers together with God. Ye are God's husbandry, ye are God's building. According to the grace of God which is given unto me, as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another buildeth thereon. But let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ." The question that people have just got to ask themselves when they get into churches, first off, am I in the will of God? Did God place me here? And if God placed you here, then you need to find out, what does God want me to do here? And then you need to go succeed. And if God didn't put you here as the pastor, the last thing you need to be doing is trying to be the pastor. Wherever it is God put you, that's what you need to try to do. And you need to be willing to just be a good soldier, to make a difference, to make those around you look good. Said in the end, You know, we all can end up looking good if you have a good church. Often, people from our church will invite one of their friends. And, you know, they only know that church is so-and-so's church. And a lot of times, if that church is friendly, if they enjoy the preaching at that church, they enjoy the singing or whatever, you know, then they go around talking about how so-and-so's church is a good church. You know, it's Brother Michael's church, or it's Brother Randy's church. And then, you know, we all end up looking good at the end, if that's what you're about. Okay? But, you know, that shouldn't be what we're about. We're about making God look good. And it's not your place to make sure credit goes to the right people. Okay? Christ is going to do that. If you get ignored in this earth, if you get overlooked in this earth, you know what? You ought to thank God, because that's just more rewards you're going to get when you're in heaven. God's not going to let anything go overlooked. If you are the unsung hero of the Baptist faith, all right, your praises will get sung in heaven if you're right. If you're not getting any credit here on earth, you'll get it when you get to heaven, and it'll be a whole lot better. Because guess what? If we give you all the credit for whatever's going on here right now, well, then only this group's going to hear about it. You get the credit when you're in heaven, all of heaven's going to hear about it. So don't worry about that. You know, we need that individual, these people, to just take their abilities, whatever it is, and find a way to use it for the work of the Lord, for the house of God. If you're a skilled carpenter, you know, use those carpentry skills to help make the church look good. You know, if the Lord provides you a permanent location, you can have, you know what? If you're a gifted woodworker or whatever your ability, use that for the work of the Lord. You know, it makes the church look good when the building looks nice. If they have nice carpentry, if things aren't falling apart, and if you have the ability to do something with that, man, you ought to take that and just go nuts with it. And just go all out. And say, you know what, this is my church. And you know what, I'm a carpenter. And so I'm a woodworker. And so I'm going to make sure my church has the nicest woodworking of any church. Because it's my church. And I want to do something with that. And you know what? Doing that, it will help make your pastor's job a little bit easier. It will end up helping him out. You know, we need those people who can sing good. We need those people who can play the music good. You know, I thank God for, you know, ladies who play skillfully. In my church, you know, our church, you know, we're a smaller church. Okay, we are not the biggest church in our area. And I don't know this, I don't know this for a fact, all right, but I'm pretty sure our church probably has the 2 best piano players in the county of any church. I would almost guarantee that. You know, my wife, she's involved with a music academy in the town, and there's not a lot of piano players, and my wife's better than the ones that are there. Both ladies in our church are extremely skilled piano players, and I love the music in our church, and you know what? It makes our whole church look good. You know, in our town, many churches, they have to pay piano players to come in and play for them. They've got people that aren't even members of their church, but they've got big congregation. So nobody plays the piano in their church, so they pay women to come in and play for them. Did you know, my wife wouldn't be able to get away with this because I wouldn't let her. She's my wife. But you know, the other lady we have in our church, she could go to one of those churches and get paid top dollar. She's going to be better than any of the piano players they have. But you know what? Thank God she's been willing to use her talents in our church. I mean, I almost feel bad. I know a lot of churches that are bigger than mine, they don't have any piano players. And we've got 2 great piano players in our church, and we usually have both of them playing at the same time. And I love it. All right? I think it's great. It adds a ton to our service. And at the end of the day, it makes my job easier. It makes me look good. Because while our services are exciting and we've got it's a very pleasant service. When you come in, the energy's good. The music's great. But the thing is, most people don't even notice it. Most people don't even really talk about it whenever they come out. But I promise you this: if all of a sudden this Sunday we had no piano, everybody would notice. Everybody, they would notice when the service, when it comes time to start, and I just got to start without the piano intro like everybody's used to, everyone would notice because we're used to it. And then after the service, when it got done and there's no music that plays, everyone would notice it because we're used to it. And we like it. And it's very pleasant. And it adds a lot to the service. And if you have the ability to do something like that, you realize how much you can help this church. Listen, a lot of people that are going to walk through these doors are going to be a little bit carnal. Okay? Especially if they've just gotten saved or they're not saved, they're going to be a little bit carnal. And if they walk into a dead service where everybody's just sitting there like a bump on a log, you know, there's no music, there's no excitement, people aren't friendly, nobody's greeting them, nobody's talking to them, nobody's smiling, nobody's doing any of those things. And then Brother Jim, he might get up here and he might preach a great message. I mean, he just might, just tear it up and just, really, give it to you. But at the same time, if they're carnal, they're not even going to like that. But you know what? You all, if you come in, if they come in and this church is smiling, people are talking, people are, loving each other, and people are being friendly and welcoming people, that kind of thing makes the whole church look good, and it can make all the difference in the world. And all of a sudden, you're going to start seeing the church grow, and then we can start working on getting those people to not be carnal and be willing to, come, because of the doctrine. But many people today, especially in a church plant, and I've talked to a lot of church planters since I've started the church. My heart's in church planting. I've talked to these guys, and one of the biggest challenges that pastors have is they're trying to get things going. They're trying to get their church off the ground, and they've got a handful of people, and thank God for any that you've got, all right? But it's like they show up and they just sit there, just daring him to entertain them. And then they sit there every week and they just look at the pastor like, Pastor, why isn't the church growing? How come these visitors aren't sticking around? Why is it just kind of a revolving door here? And they just keep looking at the pastor like, you need to do something. No, how about you do something? How about you make sure this is the friendliest church in town? How about you make sure that there's smiling faces on here? How about you make sure that there's energy? How about, you got to think about those things. And you have no idea how much your presence can help. Even if you do get all the music, all right, even if you get the piano, all right, Brother Jim's daughter she plays the piano. You get the piano in here, and the music's good, and the preaching's good, but the only people that are here is just his family, and the visitor comes in, that might be all it takes. Once again, people are carnal. People are carnal. Not long after I started my church, we started having Sunday night services. And I remember some people, one of the people who came to our church on Sunday morning invited these people to a service on a Sunday night. Well, he didn't even bother to show up for that Sunday night service. And at the time, we only had one other family that was coming on Sunday nights. And he called me up and he's like, Pastor Tommy, did you have service last night? I said, yes. And he's like, well, I invited these folks and they drove up at about 2 minutes till 6 and there was only 2 cars there. I was like, yeah, because it was only us and one other family. And they just left because they thought must not have service going on. And that's pretty, that's sad, but I'm thinking, that's how people are. They're that carnal. If they say, well, nobody else is coming, it must not be important. And because of that, those people turned around and left, and they never came back. And I'm thinking, too, you were the one that invited them, and you weren't even here. Why are they going to take it serious when the guy who invites them doesn't even show up? Listen, what are you going to do if you go out soul winning, and you're from here, and you're inviting people to church, and then they come to church, and then the person who invited them is not even here? Listen, when people come into church, they're nervous because they're going into a new location, and people like to go somewhere where they know there's going to be a familiar face. And if they do, if you go out there and you invite them and they come walking in here, guess who they're looking for? They're looking for you. You know what that means? It means you need to be here. And guess what else that means? All right? I'm just going to talk about this for a second. You know what else it means? It means you need to get here early. All right? You need to get here early. Why? We go to things early that are important. You know what we show up for things late for? Things that aren't important. Things we don't want to do. Okay? Now everybody in here was on time tonight, so nobody can get mad at me. I don't know if anybody has a problem with this. Okay? I grew up, being late was like the unpardonable sin in my home. All right? We were early for everything. Okay? I was 2 hours early at the airport today, and it was way too early when I got there. Could have had 2 more hours of sleep. But it was just the unpardonable sin. I am not late. You can ask my wife if I've ever been late for anything, and she will tell you, yes, once. One time I was late for something. It was when she was pregnant with our first child, and she wanted to go to one of these Lamaze classes. And I did not want to go to that. And I showed up late. And I suffered through most of it. I walked out for a lot of it, and it was the worst 6 hours of my life. We went to go do it all in one day. It was just a nightmare. It was a horrible experience, and I didn't want to do it. I dreaded it, and I showed up late. And we hadn't been married real long, but even then she was just like, she was thinking like, what happened? Because McMurtrys are not late. We don't do that unless we really don't want to do something. And you know why people are late? It's usually because they don't want to do something. It's because their heart's not in it. And I'm telling you right now, that kind of thing makes a difference. You need to get here early to help build the excitement for the service. You got to be here early. You got to make sure you get here before the visitors do, so they can to make sure they're going to be welcome when they come in. That's your job. That's one of the things that you've got to do to make this church look good. And you need to stop just showing up to watch the one-man show. Don't show up here, at 1 minute till or 2 minutes after, so you can dare Brother Jim to entertain you and make you feel like it was worth your drive to come out here. No, you need to come out here saying, I play an active role in this church. I am a part of this church, and I'm going to make sure that this is the best church in this area. That needs to be your attitude. And so Adino, he was good at what he did, and he accomplished some great things. And then look what it says in verse 9. I need to go back to 2 Samuel. Let's look at Eleazar, the son of Dodo. And aren't you glad your dad's name wasn't that? I heard a preacher say one time, he's like, you'd be a tough guy too if your dad's name was Dodo. It's like, you know how much he probably got picked on when he was going to school and stuff? He grew up fighting. That's why this guy was so tough. But it says, and after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, one of the 3 mighty men when they defied the Philistines that were gathered to battle, and the men of Israel were gone away. And he arose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand clave unto the sword. And the Lord wrought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to spoil. So Eleazar, he is the guy that just wouldn't quit. He just kept fighting. His hand was weary until his hand clave to the sword. He just didn't stop. And let me tell you something about church planting. All right, and you can talk to any church planter like this that's done this. There are going to be times when you're going to get weary, when you're going to get tired. I mean, folks, you're starting this right now in the middle of winter. I mean, that's the worst time start a church, right in the middle of winter. It's the most discouraging time. You always have the big snows, and nobody wants to come out, and the Lord really blessed us. We started in September, and I remember when that first winter started coming, I'm like, all right, what's going to happen? We had a lot of older people that were coming, and I was really worried about weather just stopping people for every little thing. And that first winter we were there, I mean, the Lord blessed. We didn't have one Sunday where there was like bad weather or the roads were bad, and our attendance stayed really good that whole first winter, and it was a huge blessing. But let me tell you, I could stand up here for a long time. I could just tell you about just periods of time we went through in our church, especially in the early days, where just things were going slow, things weren't going like I wanted to. I thought within 6 months of starting the church, maybe a year, I mean, we would already be looking for a new building, and I would be full time. That's what I thought. That was, I was just that convinced that as soon as the word got out that I had come to town, people just, we were going to be turning folks away. I mean, that was my attitude. It didn't really work out that way, and it was much slower than I thought, and there were times where it was discouraging. And you know what? It's like, everybody knows the pastor doesn't have the option to quit. But here's my question. How come everybody else does? When we get into these things, and as a pastor too, when we as a church, we decide we're going to do something, we're going to start something, the intent is usually to finish it. And when we make a decision, I assume that we are going to follow through on it. Not just me. I assume we are going to do it. That's just my mentality, but it's like, if a pastor quits, it's just like the biggest thing in the world. You know, what a phony, what a fraud. You know, he's not qualified. He should never get to preach again, blah, blah, blah. Well, how come everybody else is allowed to quit whenever they want and just do things whenever they feel like it? I mean, I've always wanted to do this before, just not show up for church one Sunday. Just don't even show up. I heard about a pastor that did that one time. Just, I don't know if that's one of those preacher stories that they tell or if it really happened. But I thought that'd be just kind of cool. Just one Sunday, just don't show up. People call me up. I stayed home. I was tired. I was sick. I was sick because I stayed up watching movies till 3 o'clock in the morning. And you watch TV till 3 o'clock in the morning. You're not going to feel very good when you wake up in the morning. You're going to be really, really tired. Well, why is it that everyone else is allowed to quit? But you know what? Thank God, Eliezer, he didn't quit. He just kept going. And every church, there's always going to be difficult seasons. And you've got to have faithful people in the church. You've got to have people that just won't quit. You've got to have people that are just going to be there for you. And a pastor will be emboldened to do the right thing and be faithful when he's around other people doing the same thing. And a pastor should be, I understand, a pastor should be faithful no matter what. But at the same time, pastors are humans too. And we need help. Look what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 13. It says, "Therefore we were comforted in your comfort, yea, and exceedingly the more joyed we for the joy of Titus, because his spirit was refreshed by you all. For if I have boasted anything to him of you, I am not ashamed, but as we spake all things to you in truth, even so our boasting which I made before Titus is found a truth. And his inward affection is more abundant toward you, whilst he remembereth the obedience of you all, how that with fear and trembling ye received him. I rejoice therefore, and I have confidence in you in all things." Paul is talking about, he's like, man, you guys refreshed us. We were glad, and I didn't want to take time to read the whole story, but remember Paul, he had, in the previous letter, he had to kind of get on them. He told them how they needed to remove somebody from the church. And at first when he wrote the letter, he repented of it, and he felt bad and wished he hadn't done it, but then later he realized it was what he needed to do. And they were worried about how the church received it and how they handled it. But when they found out from Titus that, guess what? This church did the right thing. They had been bragging to Titus. He'd been telling them, hey, that church in Corinth, they're going to listen. They're going to do what I told them to do in this letter. They're going to do the right thing. They're going to get right with God. But at the same time, there was a part of them that's like, is the church going to do the right thing? And so when Titus came back and he said, hey, Brother Paul, they did what they were supposed to do, man, it just lifted Paul's spirits. He was all excited. And he's like, hey, I didn't brag on you for nothing. We were right in what we boasted about. And you know what? You refreshed all of us. And he's just thanking them for doing the right thing. And let me tell you, there's been times as a pastor where, I was betting on my church to do the right thing. I was betting on them. I was betting on certain people to come through for me, and they didn't. And guess who looked like an idiot? I looked like the idiot. I looked like the bum. This person said that they were going to do something. We were going to do something as a church, and I assumed that these people were going to do what they said they were going to do. I assumed they were going to be there to participate, and they were going to help. And you know what? They just didn't come through. And in that case, it may end up making me look bad. And we need people that are going to do what they're supposed to do, who are going to be loyal to the leader. And the pastor shouldn't have to always fear them following somebody else. Can you imagine if David, he's got guys like Adino, the Esnite, Eliezer, the son of Dodo, he's got Shammah. He's got these guys that are just mighty warriors that are always just cleaning house. I mean, these guys are just, always whooping the enemies like nothing. Can you imagine what David would have, how it would have been going into battle, thinking, what if when I go into this battle, these guys turn on me? He knows he's going to have a real problem then. And that often happens where a pastor, he'll get the church together, hey, all right, hey, let's do this as a church, and then all of a sudden, people in the church, the ones who should be his mighty men, the ones who should be his warriors fighting with him, all of a sudden they want to turn and they want to fight with the pastor. Listen, some of the enemies that David went up against were great enemies. But thank God he had good people with him to help them fight, and they won. Imagine if David would have been fighting the enemies and his own people. If he'd have been fighting his own people too, it would have been a catastrophic ending. And we need to understand that you're not here to be fighting with the leadership in this church. You know, you're here to help and support and understand that I am a part of what's going to make this successful, and I've got to use my gifts, and I've got to use them for the glory of God. I got to do great things. I need to sacrifice. I need to go out of my way. I need to get out of my comfort zone. I've got to do these things if something's going to be accomplished. And we see that Eliezer, he fought for the kingdom and not for himself. Look what it says about him. After he fights the battle, everybody else flees. Everybody else flees. He stays and he fights till his hands where his hand cleaves to the sword. But then look what it says. The people returned after him only to spoil. After he wins the battle, here comes everybody else. Hey, let's get the spoils now. And you know what? We don't see him complaining about it. And you know what? That often happens too in churches. And let me tell you something. God blesses the Eliezers, all right? God blesses those that are faithful. But one of the things you're going to see, and if you're not careful, you'll let it get you bitter, there's going to be some of you that you're going to be here through the thick and thin. You're going to do the hard stuff. You're going to be faithful. You're going to get weary. Your hand's going to cleave to the sword. And then finally, the Lord's going to bless. You're going to see great victories. And then all of a sudden, you're going to have all these other people. All right, now that it's fun, now that we got a big crowd, now that all this is, now that we've got the nicer building, we got this, we got that, now I want to in on the action. And you know what? You just got to say, thank God. I'm not here just for me. I'm not about collecting the spoils for myself. I'm here for the cause of Christ. And I personally would have been mad, and I think I'd have told all those people, hey, those are my spoils. But that's not what he did. That's not what he did. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't fighting for his own gain. He was fighting for the kingdom. He was fighting for David, and he got a great victory that day. So let's look at this third fellow, Shammah, verse 11. It says, and after him was Shammah, the son of Agi, the Hararite. And the Philistines were gathered together into a troop, and there was a piece of ground full of lentils, and the people fled from the Philistines. But he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it, and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory. Here everybody else is running, but we've got this one guy who defends a patch of lentils. All right? He just stays there, and he's like, you know what, I'm going to defend this. I don't like the Philistines. I'm sick of them taking stuff that's ours. And you know what? I'm not going to let them have it. And even though everybody else runs, you know what he does? He continues fighting and he defeats them. You know who he reminds me of? He reminds me of the guy who sticks to the old paths and isn't willing to compromise. You know, we need people like that in the church. One of the biggest problems and one of the biggest battles pastors have to deal with is just the constant pressure to compromise. The constant pressure to just give in. Oh, you know, Pastor, we could get more people if you just lighten up. You know, Pastor, if you just, maybe trendy up things a little bit, maybe let's get some color lighting in here, maybe spike up your hair. Well, ain't gonna work out too good. Maybe get a tattoo on your head or something. Do something to be more cool. Do something to be more hip, Pastor. We'll get more people if we do some of that. Maybe lighten off on preaching against the homos. Maybe let's just talk about the friendly stuff. Let's talk more about love. Let's talk about those things. Pastors are constantly dealing with that kind of pressure from the people. But you know what? Thank God, David wasn't the only one that was like this. You got guys like Shammah here. He says, you know what? This patch of lentils belongs to the Lord, and it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere unless it's over my dead body. And you know what? Listen, folks, your country has its issues, all right? And I don't have much room to talk, okay? But let me tell you something. They're pushing. They're trying to strip away things, just not even little by little anymore. I mean, they're getting really bold. And you know what? You're going to have to be willing to take some stands and say, you know what? We're not going to move. And you know what? When Brother Jim, if he's preaching on these things that your country doesn't like you preaching on, and getting on things that you're not supposed to be getting on, you know what you need to do? You need to stick with him, and you need to say, hey, this might not seem like a big deal. It's just a patch of lentils, but you know what? It belongs to the Lord, and we're not letting the stinking Philistines get it. We're not moving from it. Doesn't matter if everybody else is fleeing, because I can promise you this. When it comes to certain teachings, all right, especially when it comes to the LGBTs and stuff, the other churches have already fled. Y'all get, just like the people there, they all fled when the battle got going. And the other churches, they're not going to back you up. The other Baptists in this area, they're not going to back you up when you're preaching the truth on this stuff. If your pastor is calling them sodomites or queers, whatever like that, you're not going to get backed up even by the other preachers. But you know what? Brother Jim at least ought to be getting backed up by all of you. All of you in here ought to say, you know what? I'm with you. And we're not letting this go anywhere. You know, you keep preaching that. You stay strong on this. We're going to stick to this. We're not going to let go of this. This is too important. It belongs to the Lord, and we're going to fight for it. That's got to be your attitude. You need to have your pastors back when it comes to fighting that temptation. You need to be that. Don't be like Israel when God said, ask for the old paths, wherein is the good way, and they said, we will not walk therein. Listen, there's pastors out there that are trying to get their churches on the old paths, but the church doesn't want it. There's pastors out there right now, they want to preach many of the truths that pastors like myself preach. They want to preach the truth about the homos. They want to preach the truth about end times prophecy. They want to preach the truth about Zionism and dispensationalism and all these things that aren't very popular to preach against. They want to preach those things, but you know what? They know if they do, they're going to lose half their congregation. They know if they do, and this is the way it often is. You'll have half the congregation, they know this group will stick with me. This group will be gone. It's these ones that are kind of in between that go off what the majority does. They're the ones that are always worried about what they're going to do. Because you have those people that just kind of go with the flow or whatever. But you know what? Thank God in those churches when they have the people that they can say, but you know what? These people, they're not going anywhere. I can count on these people. I can trust them. And often it's those ones who help the people that are kind of in between, that don't really know where they're at. And you've got to determine, I'm going to be the Shammah. I'm not going to be moved. I'm going to stay faithful. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to stick to the old paths. And then lastly, just real quick, I want to cover this. Look what it says in verse 13. Here I like how these three guys, they team up. And it says, and 3 of the 30 chief went down and came to David in the harvest time into the cave of Adullam, and the troop of the Philistines pitched in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in a hold, and the garrison of the Philistine was then in Bethlehem. And David longed and said, oh, that one would give me a drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. And the 3 mighty men brake through the host of the Philistines, and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. Now, when I look at that passage, I think, man, David, you should have drank it. Those guys went through a lot of work. But I believe what David understood, what these guys did for him here, I think it was kind of borderline worship. And he's like, I'm not going to accept that. And he just pours it out to the Lord. And you know what? We don't see those guys complaining about it. David's like, I'm not going to take that type of worship. And there is, sometimes that happens. There's man worship. And there has been instances where churches went a little too far in lifting up the man of God and putting him up on a pedestal. But y'all understand, that's not really the norm in most cases. And it's not really the norm in most cases, too, when it comes to a church plant and things like that. But listen, these guys, I don't think they were trying to worship David or anything like that. But this was their attitude. The king wants to drink from the well of Bethlehem. That's water he used to drink from as a kid. Let's see if we can't make that happen. And you know what? That needs to be your attitude around here. The pastor said, once again, he's not often the best at everything he does. But he's kind of an overseer. He's one God puts in place because of, got specific, particular skills or whatever. For whatever reason, God uses them. Sometimes I wonder why God uses some of us. I asked myself that many times after I started my church. When I started my church, I was like, I see why God's using me. But then after I did it for a while, I'm like, why did God pick me? That was kind of my attitude. And you know what? We need people that will say, you know what? I want to help him. Whatever he's trying to accomplish for this church, whatever his vision is going to be my vision. He wants this church to not, I don't know how long it would take to knock this whole, he wants to knock this entire town in 2019. I'm going to make sure that happens. You know what some of you ought to do? You ought to get together and say, hey, let's make that happen. You know what we need? We need some of these young people in here to say, you know what, I'm going to be that super soul winner in the church. You know, the pastor, he's busy, he's raising a family, he's working a job, he's trying to pastor a church. He's not going to be able to be out there just soul winning every single day. But you know what? Maybe there's a young man, you have a little more time to do that. Some of you guys can get together and you can team up and say, you know what, we're going to go win 100 souls this year. Just do something big like that. Really, that type of thing, having a soul winner like that in the church, that's going to make the pastor look good. It's going to make the whole church look good. You have a few churches, even you have some ladies in the church that are going to get together, say, you know what, we're going to knock doors. We're going to go get this many people saved. We're going to shoot for a goal of getting this many visitors in the church this year. Why we want to do that? Because we know the pastor wants to see this place filled up. We know he wants to see this church grow, and it's partly our job to make sure that happens. And whenever you see he has a vision, whenever he's preaching and he's kind of sharing his heart, you ought to be paying attention and saying, you know what, let's make that happen. You know, if he's preaching and saying, you know, one of these days I'd like to have a whole bunch of instruments up here, you know, helping with the service. I said, well, you know what, I play this instrument. You know what, let's start practicing. Let's start getting together. Let's start doing this. Whatever it is, when you hear him talking about these things, you ought to say, you know what? That's our cue. That's our calling right there. Everybody's always waiting for this divine appointment. They always want the pastor to come out and blow a trumpet and pull out the big scroll. Hear ye, I am proclaiming so-and-so of Sound Doctrine Baptist Church to be the official bulletin giver-outer, you know, or whatever. You know, you gotta have that big fancy appointment and a title and all that. Hey, how about if you see a need for something, just say, hey, I'll do it. How about just volunteer? Instead of just waiting for some big thing like that, just go do it. And that's what these guys, I don't even think that they asked David. I think they just heard him say that and like, we can take those guys. All right, let's go cut off some heads and get a drink of water for our king. And that's exactly what they did. And then they got back and well, I guess that's not exactly what he wanted, but oh well. We got rid of some more Philistines, you know. And that needs to be the attitude. We need people to get zealous and just get fired up and go do something. It's one of the things that just, and I've been getting to experience this more and more in the last year, and it has just thrilled my heart. My favorite thing, when we started the church, nothing got done unless I was participating. And now, when my favorite thing in the world is when things are getting accomplished at my church, and I'm not doing it. I love it. I love it when there's soul winning going on. I love going soul winning, but I love when there's soul winning going on and I'm not there. I like seeing that our church can function and people can do stuff without me holding their hand. It just thrills my heart. It's great. And some of the best soul winning days they've had this year, I wasn't even out with them when it happened. And they're coming back and they're telling me about all this stuff. Man, I'm like, praise the Lord, all these people got saved. And then I'm like, you know what? I wasn't the one doing it. It's great. I'm already getting plenty of blessings for all that I'm doing. I want other people to be blessed too. That's why I want them doing these things. And so don't just sit around waiting for those, you know, divine appointments, things like that. Just volunteer. Do something. I like Matthew 20 verse 6 says, and at about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle and saith unto them, why stand ye here all the day idle? There was work to do out there. There's money they could have been making. And here these people are there just standing all the day idle. And they said unto him, because no man hath hired us. He saith unto them, go ye also in the vineyard, and whatsoever is ripe, that shall ye receive. They were waiting for somebody to come along and ask them to do something. You know, don't wait for that. Don't wait for that. Just go do something. And so the thing everyone needs to realize is that starting a church, it's done by warriors. It's not done by spectators. Okay? This is not a spectator sport. It's something by warriors. We need athletes. You know, you don't want to be the guy sitting in the stands watching the athletes. No, you've got to be the athletes if you're going to get something going. That's what you've got to do. If you want this to get done, you can do it if you'll do your part. Don't put it all on one man. Don't put it all on the pastor or his family. Don't do that. The more you give to a church too, the more you're going to get out of it. Don't be a leech. Don't be sucking the life out of church. Don't be that person that just eats up all his time, that just gives him all his headaches, that he's got to preach all his sermons for you because you're just such a pain in the neck and always causing trouble. Don't be that person. Be a help. Pay attention to the needs of the leadership. Be the Aaron and Hur. We all know the story where when Moses would hold up his hands, Israel would prevail in the battle, but when his hands would go down, the enemy would prevail, and his arms got weary. And so what did Aaron and Hur do? They came and they helped hold his arms up. You know what they did? They didn't just stand there. Come on, Moses, you can keep those arms up. They're not that heavy. They didn't do that just yelling at him. They said, here, let's put some things on him. Let's help hold his arms up. Let's help him get this done. And let me tell you something. I have seen this way too much in many church plants where you have the people that come in, and it's just a bunch of spectators. You're not going to get it done with spectators. And then here's another little secret too. When it comes to a pastor, the kind of pastor you're going to have is going to be the kind, he's going to act the way you treat him. If you treat him like a pile of garbage, like he's no good, that's just how he's going to preach. You know why? Because that's how he's going to feel. But if you treat him like he's the greatest thing in the world, if he knows you're praying for him, if he knows you support him, if he knows you love him, you don't know how much that fires a guy up. And let me tell you something about my church. You know, our church, I mean, they act, maybe they're conning me, but man, they've convinced me that they like my preaching. They've convinced me that they like what I'm doing, that they appreciate what I'm doing, that they love me. And you know what it does? It motivates me. It gets me fired up. You know what? I don't want to go and preach a dud to them this Sunday. There's people that drive long distances to come to our church, and I'm like, man, these people are driving a long way to come here preaching. They could just be watching the live stream on YouTube, but they're coming here because it's the right thing to do, to be an encouragement. I don't want to let those people down. And you know what it does? It inspires me to get something from the Lord and preach something great. But you know what? If every little thing just keeps you out of church, if every little thing gets you to complain, then you know what? It's going to wear on a guy. And he might not be putting in the effort. He should, but I'm not preaching to him right now. I'm preaching to everybody else. But if you treat him that way, he's more likely to be that way. And that is your part. We have got to encourage each other, and you got to encourage leadership in this church. And if you do that, I believe God will do great things here in Morden, Manitoba. And I want to see that, and I know it can be done. I've seen it for myself. I've seen it done. And if it can be done in the United States, it can be done in Canada too. All right? Do you guys in Canada think you're better than all the other countries? I know we do in the United States. Is that something you guys do or not? But I know it can be done here too. And we're all people. It's the same gospel. And so I hope you do that. So with that, let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for your word. I pray this message was a help and encouragement. I pray it'll help everyone to take it to heart, and they'll do their part to just make this place a success, and they'll just see great things accomplished for your glory, Lord. We know Canada and Manitoba, they need a church like this. And dear God, we pray that you'll start something great here and do a work that will spread to other parts of this country. In your name we pray. Amen.